welcome to Tim Conley Drums. A question that keeps coming up, and people are talking to me quite a bit about this, is where have all the bands gone? If you look at the current Spotify charts, there's only two bands charting on the current this week's Spotify, and they are Coldplay and Linkin Park, and that's it. And over the last several months, there's been a couple of other bands, including the Beatles, that released a new song. So really, the whole musical scene has changed dramatically, especially in the rock music genre. There's basically no rock bands charting anymore. If you look back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, quite often there would be over 140 rock bands and or bands in different genres as well charting. Spotify didn't exist, but in terms of the top 40, you would have 140 bands in on the charts. And nowadays it's dwindled down to just, as I said, on Spotify, and in the top 40, there's only two right now. So where have all these bands gone? What has happened to music that bands have actually disappeared? Well, I have some theories, so I want to discuss that in today's video. The old school idea of friends getting together in somebody's garage and just banging out some songs, and one kid writes some lyrics and another kid comes up with the guitar part, and that just doesn't exist anymore. And I know this for a fact because I'm a very, very active drum teacher. And when I talk to the kids, only one of my current students, and I have close to 50 students a week, only one is currently playing in a band. And that band is also related to his school. So he has a school band that he's involved with, and then he actually has a band the old-fashioned way, which is with his friends. That's almost unheard of nowadays, of kids in the garage banging it out, playing, Van Halen and playing Guns N' Roses and all that sort of thing. It just doesn't exist hardly at all anymore. Now, I do know that at the music school that I teach at, we have a band program, and it is quite active. There are kids involved in the band program, and the love of playing live music is still there. But in terms of bands charting, bands going out and starting fresh and having new music and writing their own songs and all that sort of thing, it's gone. So all those old school ideas of kids banging it out in the garage, it just doesn't exist anymore. Now, part of the reason it doesn't exist is kids are interested in doing other things. Sports is a big part of kids' activities. They like to be on the computer, Instagram and social media, not so much Facebook for kids, but TikTok and other places that kids turn to. They go there and they get their entertainment from that sort of thing on social media and just flipping through like crazy, which leads to my next idea of why there's no more bands. It's a replaceable society now. Everything is so fast. Everybody looks at things really quickly and just dismisses things. Now, generally speaking, songs have a 3-month shelf life. Pop music has generated it to be so. Whereas you take classic rock tunes from the Beatles, Zeppelin, The Doors, Deep Purple, Queen, all those great, great bands from the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. Those bands, that music is still around today, and it's endearing and long-standing music. Whereas a pop tune comes out, some artist, Dua Lipa or somebody, Billie Eilish, they put a song out. It charts at number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever, but then it's forgotten. The song is gone, and half the people have never even heard it. There's no iconic songs anymore because there's no iconic bands that are in existence or developing towards an iconic band. Like, I think the last like the newest of the iconic bands is the stuff that was in the 90s. Even though it's considered old school now, Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, all those grunge type rock bands that came out in the 90s, well, they're considered old school bands now. Even though Green Day has an amazing, amazing way of constantly being in kids' face. Because I know from teaching that kids still want to learn how to play some of those old Green Day tunes. But Green Day put out some new stuff. I know the Red Hot Chili Peppers have put out new stuff, but those are all old bands. No, but there is no new bands putting out music and charting. Of course, there's going to be new bands. I know there's going to be commenters. Oh, what about this band? What about that band? You're just not aware of this band and that band. There's lots of bands still putting music out, but it's not iconic and charting. Like I said, in the 80s, you pick any week in the 80s, and there was well over 100 bands listed in the top, say, 150 to 200 bands in the top 40 charts. If you expanded the top 40 to list 200 bands that were charting, over 100 of them were bands, not just solo artists. Now, another thing is music has not only become replaceable and throwawayable, but people just can sit at home on their laptop and generate songs. You don't even have to know how to play an instrument necessarily anymore to generate a computer oriented or AI type song. AI, in my opinion, is absolutely killing music. And the desire for kids to want to get out and really do it the old fashioned way and learn how to play an instrument, it's dying. It's almost dead. Now, my own daughter is keeping that alive. She plays drums and she's learning how to play guitar. She takes lessons. Of course, I teach her drums, and she takes guitar lessons every week. And she loves the old school music. And she doesn't even, it's like she's from the 80s. She was joking around with me yesterday saying, I should have been born in the 80s or the 70s because I don't like any of this modern approach to music. So she is rare. Most kids are not like my daughter. They are into this fast, replaceable, forgettable, soulless music that is the pop and rap scene of today. So another thing I want to talk about is there's just no money for the artists anymore. The only way that bands are making money, unless you're a massive, massive artist like Metallica or something, the only way bands are making money is out on the road touring. And all the bands that are touring that are making money are old school big name bands such as Metallica, Green Day, Pearl Jam tours like crazy, Foreigner, Journey, Styx, all those bands still all out touring, making money. They're making virtually nothing off of record sales because record sales just don't exist anymore compared to the glory days of vinyl, for example, or even CDs for that matter. With downloadable music and everything on YouTube, nobody buys music anymore. So it becomes not only for the artist, why should we put music out? We're just going to lose money. It also is involving record labels that are saying, well, we're not going to make any money on these bands, so why should we promote them? Because it used to be that a band signed with a label, they put a record out, the record got heavily promoted on radio, and it was pushed out and promoted in terms of their live show. The band toured the album, and it would last for anywhere up to 2 years. Some bands would tour their album for 2 years, or some would do a tour for a year, and then at the end of that year, back to the studio, put another new album out, and then go back on the road and re-promote the new album. These things don't exist anymore, where bands put albums out and then go out and tour the album. It's died. Now, modern technology has also played into this. Like I said earlier, it's much easier to just form up a tune on a keyboard or a laptop than it is to actually get out and actually play the instruments. It's costly, studios are costly, and it's really cheap to put out a tune on your laptop versus having to rent studio time, you know? So, I mean, the other thing is the local scene has diminished. There's just not as many venues for local bands to get out and play. Now, there are bands, playing. There's lots of local small bands, they're all cover bands playing, but there's very few new bands out playing the scene that are actually starting out with fresh ideas, fresh music, and are doing well and being promoted by a label. That is almost completely gone. There's still the indie scene. The indie scene is still alive in a lot of major cities. It's still alive, but it's not doing well in the sales category in terms of downloads. I mean, that's how music is sold now. Downloads. Nobody's making any money off those downloads, so bands are just like, what's the point? Another thing about being in a band and why bands have diminished is, quite frankly, people have changed. It, People were much more social, and they realized that if I want to play music, I've got to be in a band. So they learned to adapt to being in a band and trying to get along. Nowadays, people just don't get along. There isn't that social element as much. And as a result, they just go off and say, screw it. I'm not dealing with these people. I'm just going to go off and make music on a keyboard computer by myself and not have to deal with all the nonsense. So that is a real and viable reason for bands to be diminished. Look at all these bands that don't get along. Look at the Jane's Addiction thing where they're fighting on stage and stuff like. And these are bands that are out on tour that have millions of fans and they can't freaking get along. So if bands like this can't get along, how are people who are in small bands supposed to get along? It's not easy and it's difficult. People just can't be bothered anymore. They just can't be bothered. It's a lot of work to put a band together, to get 4 or 5 people on the same page, writing music. I'm talking about bands that are doing original music, not cover bands. People doing original music. There are artists out there that want to get original music out, but rather than doing the band route, they just release it, like I said, on their own thing. The band is individual artists. It's not a band. The other thing is that everything is fast. Everybody wants everything fast. Sometimes being in a band and putting music out takes time. If you look at Tool is a prime example. They take forever putting songs out. Now, Tool is an exception to the rule in the sense that people will wait. Die-hard fans will wait for Tool to put some music out, but their music is so complicated. It's so hard to record. It's so, out there kind of music that they certainly are not pumping out like the way pop tunes do, which is basically mindless tripe. And they put pop tunes out constantly, same drum beats. There's no live instruments in on a lot of those occasions. And you take a band like Tool that really put their heart and soul into their music. Well, there are no bands out there like Tool in the pop world, that's for sure. Now, in the metal scene, there's still a vibrant metal scene that put out music, but none of it charts. You're never going to see Infant Annihilator on the charts. The music is too extreme. And the only metal bands that I can think of that really chart are top 40 type metal bands, which would be like, Metallica and stuff like that. But back in the day, though, Judas Priest and Van Halen, and they're not metal bands, they're rock bands, but Judas Priest, Van Halen, even Iron Maiden, they were vibrant in the scene. But we don't have these kind of bands that are vibrant in the scene anymore. TikTok, Instagram, video games, kids are just not interested in putting the music together anymore, and they just can't be bothered. They'd rather do those things instead of spending a lot of time in the band thing. Now, when I ask my students, or I encourage my drum students, you need to get with a guy that plays guitar and a guy that plays bass and get a singer, try and put a band together. And they'll look at me like I'm from another planet because kids just don't do this. Nobody had to tell me to do that when I was a kid. It just happened naturally. But nowadays, when you tell them that, they look at you like, what do you mean put a band together? How do you do that? Kids just don't do it anymore. It's unfortunate, but it is the way it is. I think that in the end, I don't really think there's any much hope for bands in the future either, sadly. It breaks my heart to say this, but I just don't see bands making a comeback. Unfortunately, rock music is dead, which also breaks my heart. I love rock music. There's always going to be people out there that love rock music and they keep the old stuff alive. But in terms of new bands forming and moving forward and developing a whole new vibrant rock scene, sadly, I just don't think it's going to happen. Now, another guy I want to point out to you that put out a video on this topic a few months ago is Rick Beato. Very, very smart guy, and he talks about some of the things that I was talking about today in his video. So check out Rick's video as well for more information on why there just aren't any more bands. Anyways, thanks very much for watching, and as always, keep drumming. See ya.